Welcome to Mom and Mind, where we dive into all aspects of perinatal mental health and wellness related to pregnancy, birth, loss, postpartum, and new parenthood. It's so much more than postpartum depression. We raise the volume on all of these topics in the hopes that someday everyone will have the support and info that they deserve before they need it. Please note this podcast is not a replacement for treatment by a professional or professional training. Welcome, I'm Dr. Kat. In this episode, we are going to be hearing a personal story from Alexis Bruce, a mom from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, who is going to be sharing about the traumatic experience she had with the birth of her son, and then her experience through postpartum anxiety and OCD. So at the beginning of this episode today, I just want to put out there a sensitivity notice for those of you who had a traumatic experience with birth or are currently dealing with OCD, to gauge for yourself if this is something that you'd like to listen to now or might be better served to listen to at another time. Some of the difficult things that Alexis talks about is a placental abruption and very intense OCD symptoms. One of the things I really love about our story today with Alexis is that she's sharing what is very typical with OCD, and it is the fear that the thoughts that you're having are somehow going to come true or that you're going to do something to your child. And you'll hear throughout her story that the intrusive thoughts that she was experiencing and the OCD symptoms, that she was really doing everything in her power to keep her child safe, which is very common in OCD. So Alexis Bruce is sharing her story with us. She lives in Milwaukee, Wisconsin with her husband, Tyler, and 3 beautiful children, stepdaughter Ava and 2 sons, Noah and Leo. She's a stay-at-home mom turned into maternal mental health advocate after the traumatic birth of her youngest son. She was diagnosed with postpartum anxiety and OCD. And through her struggle, it became clear that there was a lack of information, education, and focus on perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, and it is her goal to help change that. She now works with Mom's Mental Health Initiative, a local nonprofit group whose mission is to help moms navigate perinatal mood and anxiety disorders by sharing information, connecting them to resources, and providing peer support. So let's welcome Alexis. Welcome, Alexis. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Kat.
Yeah, thank you for wanting to come on and share your story. And again, it's so beautiful and necessary that we hear stories and I thank you so much for sharing yours because, we go through these things and a lot of people go through things like a perinatal mood or anxiety disorder. And it's just so lovely to know that you're not alone. And I know you know that now through your story and all the work that you're doing. So yeah, I appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So how about just start wherever you're comfortable with telling us your story?
Sure. So I really struggled with anxiety. I think for the majority of my life, there was kind of an undertone of being anxious in college. And when I graduated college and started my first job, I did experience a spike in anxiety, but it was always very manageable. Once I had my first son, I had my first experience with intrusive thoughts. His pregnancy and delivery were a dream, and it was his second day in the hospital, and the nurses were coming in to change the bedding, and they were going to turn the lights up. And so my husband said, why don't you go in the bathroom with him and just keep the lights dim so that he doesn't wake up? Well, the nurses had just ran a whirlpool bath for me, and I was holding him in the bathroom, and all of a sudden this thought flashed in my head that said, what if I dropped him in the bathtub? That immediately sent me into a panic. I spent the rest of the time in the hospital, afraid to tell anybody what I'd experienced and constantly fighting panic attacks, thinking, what is wrong with me? How could I ever have this thought? Just feeling very guilty and scared.
Sure, right.
The third day, we were getting close to going home, and I told my husband what happened, and he said, well, I think, let's just talk to your doctor. And I didn't really know what was going on at that point. I think I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't know what it was. No one had ever told me that intrusive thoughts were a thing, that postpartum anxiety, OCD, were possible. So I did tell my doctor. She suggested talking to somebody, and we went home. Somehow, I really credit being able to nurse Noah with what helped us bond and helped my anxiety subside, because for whatever reason, when we got home, things got better. I didn't have any more intrusive thoughts. My anxiety was under control, and I thought, whatever that was, I'm glad I'm past it. But I moved on. And then I became pregnant with Leo when Noah was 8 months old. He was not planned, so caused a spike in my anxiety, and I stay home with my kids. So I remember just finding out that I was pregnant and really having a hard time processing that realization, because I felt like I wasn't ready physically to be pregnant again yet, and I definitely felt like I was pushing him from the nest too soon. So that was hard for me. And I was home with him, and suddenly I started to experience intrusive thoughts again.
That's early in your pregnancy with Leo?
It was early in my pregnancy, correct. Looking back, I've really come to understand that the intrusive thoughts that my brain is sending me is, it's saying, we're stressed out, something's going on, you're not listening. So those intrusive thoughts are the way that my brain sends those false alarms to say, you need to pay attention to what's going on. But at the time, that fear is so real.
Right. Yeah.
And when you're experiencing those, you can't rationalize, what's happening. You just have such fear.
Right.
And so I decided to be proactive, and I went to talk to a therapist for a few sessions, and once again, things got better. So I felt really good that I had established that relationship just in case things did get a little rocky after Leo's birth. But yeah, pregnancy progressed normally. I got to 33 weeks and 2 days. And I had been having a lot. I mean, he was such an active baby, 11 weeks on. It was a constant dance party in there. And I said to my husband, he is going to be different. Like, he's got so much energy, like he's going to do big things. And he has not let us down.
Right.
So that weekend, so Leo was born on a Tuesday, October 18th, 2017. The weekend prior, I was having a lot of what I thought were Braxton Hicks and just a lot of pressure. At my OB appointment the week before, we had talked about how these were normal things to experience. I had 2 pregnancies close together, and it was my second, so having some of these symptoms earlier was normal. So I didn't think that there was anything that warranted contacting my doctor. And to tell you how type A of a personality I am, my son was napping, and my oldest son was napping, and I was on page 6 of writing notes for his grandparents who are going to take care of him while we were in the hospital delivering his brother. And he's like the easiest kid to take care of, but I just wanted to be prepared, and this experience showed me that sometimes you don't have control over that. So while he was napping, I decided to take a shower, and I was in the shower and I was having so many Braxton Hicks. I thought that's what they were. I got out of the shower and I was really uncomfortable, but I saw Noah was waking up. So I put on my bathrobe and I went in his room, and I was singing to him and reached in to grab him, and I felt something, and I reached down and my hand was covered in blood.
Oh no.
So I turned, and then it was just coming quickly. So
gosh,
it was absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
I mean, there are no words. So I don't know what everyone says. Why didn't you call 911? I wasn't thinking clearly. I called my husband first.
Sure.
And he said, call 911. And so that's what I did. And he was thinking clearly enough to call my neighbor, who came over and stood with Noah, and she said, you need to lay down. So I lay down in the middle of our hallway and waited for help to come. All I knew is that I thought he was gone for sure.
Yeah, sure. All the worries start.
Oh, yeah. And so the paramedics got there and they were taking my vitals. And I just remember being so frantic and asking them, is my baby okay? Is my baby okay?
Yeah.
And they said, we can't tell you that. All we can tell you is that your vitals are good. So that is a good time for your baby.
Mm-hmm.
So my husband ended up getting home from work about 30 seconds before the ambulance was going to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was able, thankfully, to come with me to the hospital. And it's hard not to get emotional when you got to the hospital and they put the monitor on my belly and we heard his heartbeat and we both just started sobbing.
Mm-hmm.
We were in the right place and, would do whatever we needed to do to get him out safely.
Yeah.
So the conversation was turned quickly to emergency C-section. We didn't know exactly where the bleeding was coming from. So they said that was going to be the safest route for both me and for Leo.
Mm-hmm.
So they were going through that procedure was going to entail. And as they were monitoring him, they said he actually looked stable.
Mm-hmm.
So the conversation switched from C-section to let's see how long we can keep him in there.
Okay. So can I ask, just with the frame of, just for reference, that how quickly is all of this happening?
Sure. So I started bleeding at 12:30 p.m. and then I was at the hospital by 1:15.
Okay. So everything is happening very quickly. There's not a whole lot of time to really wrap your mind around any of this. And everyone's in a rush to get you safe, get to the hospital, and they're having to go through multiple options. Assess you, give you some sense of what's going on or whatever. I don't know what they're telling you, but this is a lot to take in.
Yeah.
In a very short period of time, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You're completely right. That, up until where we are now in the story, that it did move very quickly. Mm-hmm. And then it just came to a standstill. And it was about waiting and watching and seeing if we could slow things down. When I got to the hospital, my contractions were a minute apart and I was at 3 centimeters. So they wanted to see if I could stop progressing. And ideally, at 33 weeks, his lungs aren't ready for the world yet. So ideally, they wanted 48 hours to give him a steroid shot to help his lungs start to work. So I got a dose when I got to the hospital. Then they wanted to give me a second dose 24 hours later. And then he needed 24 hours for that to take effect. So that was our goal. If we can keep him in there for 48 hours, that's going to be very helpful for him in terms of respiratory challenges. So they moved me to a regular room. No one was checking me. No one was really giving me any updates. We had no idea, are we having this baby today? What's happening?
Oh, so things are still up in the air?
Uh-huh.
All right.
Yeah, things are up in the air completely. So we didn't know what was happening and no one was coming in and telling us he's looking really good on the monitor or here's an update, or we didn't have any information. So the day progressed and it was around 7:00 p.m. and my husband said, I'm going to go home, get a change of clothes, get something to eat. By the time he got back, my contractions were getting pretty strong. I had an epidural with my first delivery, so I didn't know exactly what active labor felt like, but I had a good idea that this was it.
Right. Yeah.
So I started to tell the nursing staff that I was getting pretty uncomfortable. They wouldn't give me an epidural or anything until they knew that I was going to deliver for sure. So things just kept going. My husband said, I'm going to try and get some sleep. And I said, absolutely, you should. We don't know what's going to happen. And I just remember laying in the hospital bed and I was on my side and I was hanging onto the side rail of the bed and my contractions were so strong. I literally could rip that side rail right off the bed.
To me, that sounds like labor.
Oh, it was incredibly intense. So my husband said, I can't listen to you go through this anymore. So he got up and was trying to soothe me. And I looked at him and I said, I have to push. And so he ran out and got some of the nurses, and a nurse came in and she said, well, the doctor's delivering another baby, so I'll let him know. And I said, no, I have to push now. Mm-hmm. And she said, well, I guess I'll check you. Oh. She checked me, and I was at 7 centimeters and my water was right there. She said, absolutely do not push. She said, if you push, this baby's going to be here. There was no one in the room from the NICU, no doctors, just that one nurse. And I have to say, at this point, my anxiety was pretty high because I felt like no one was listening to me.
Right.
When I was saying this is happening, so that was scary.
Sure.
And so then also, I had to try. As soon as I knew that he was coming, I said, can I get the epidural? They said no. So I'm not kidding, it was within 5 minutes. There was probably 12 people from the NICU team, multiple nurses. The doctor came in, he put his arms through his scrubs, and I pushed through one contraction and Leo was born.
What?
Yeah. Yep. That was it. And so now remember, his lungs aren't ready to be outside of me yet. So when he was born, he let out one cry. And I remember being so relieved to hear that cry and thinking, he's going to be okay. And then they took him away from me, obviously. Mm-hmm. And my husband and I had to listen to them trying to get him to breathe. And I remember looking at my husband, and he was just crying. And I said, can you see him? And there were so many people, he couldn't see him. We could just hear what was happening. And
that's so hard.
It's so hard. And you feel so helpless.
Right.
And so I needed a couple stitches. So one of the residents was doing that. And I kept asking her, is he okay? Is he okay? And she wouldn't tell me that he was. All she would say is, he's got a great team of people working on him. And, that's all we know at this point.
Okay. I mean, just picturing what's going on, you and your husband have been through the ringer emotionally, and you have been having all of this anxiety and all of these really, really difficult, traumatizing experiences along the way. And still all of this helplessness is there, that there's nothing you can do. You're waiting and nobody's giving you any information.
Or help.
Yeah.
It was scary on all fronts. I was scared of what was happening with my body, and I was scared for my son, obviously. Sure. So it doesn't get better from there. So he was born at 2:29 a.m. and they took him right down to the NICU. He did need to be intubated. So we didn't know what was happening with him at all. And then the first nurse who came in after he was born, literally we went from having 20 people in the room to just my husband and I again, alone.
And still not knowing anything other than that he went to the NICU.
Correct. Mm. And I remember we looked at each other and we just said, what just happened?
Right.
Did we really just have a baby? It was the most surreal experience. It just didn't seem like it could be real.
Right.
So the first nurse who came in, she came in and she handed me a set of pump parts and she told me to start pumping.
What? Just like that?
Just like that. There was no, are you okay? There was no acknowledgement of the trauma that I had just experienced. There was just no sympathy or attention to the severity of what had happened. I think at that point, I was starting to have some feelings of, I've been through a lot, this was very stressful and traumatic, but the fact that no one was checking in with me made me feel like those feelings weren't valid.
Oh, sure. That makes sense.
And so everyone was focusing on Leo, of course, and while I think that is so important, I think that in circumstances like these, sometimes the mom gets forgotten. And so I went into survival mode for him. I, pumped 10 times a day to try and get my milk to come in. I, did everything that I could for him. First time that I got to see him was about 3 hours after he was born.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to see him, but not really, because his face was covered with tubes and medical tape, and I wasn't allowed to touch him or, see him or smell him or all the wonderful things that I got to experience with my first son. I was completely robbed of that experience. So the next 5-6 months of Leo's life, we can really fast forward through because, like I said, I was in survival mode. He had a few health concerns. He turned jaundice at 6 weeks. So we thought that there was something wrong with his liver function, so had to go through tests with that.
How long was he in the NICU?
21 days.
Mm-hmm.
He was in the NICU for 21 days. So all the while, my husband and I are trying to balance our other children, plus, my husband still has to work and wanting to spend as much time at the hospital as we can. Mm-hmm. So we would take shifts. It was really hard because I had wanted to breastfeed Leo, and I got one chance a day to try nursing him when he was in the NICU. And he did a pretty good job latching, but for a premature baby, he needed more. So of course needed to be fed. So I was just really going through the motions when he was in the hospital. And my mother-in-law is a psych nurse. And I remember her saying, I'm really surprised how well you're doing after what you've been through. And I said, yeah, I was too. But I was just doing what I had to do for my family and for my kids. And Leo came home and he developed severe reflux. So for the first,
so hard. He had to be held upright 24 hours a day. So we had to stay up with him all night for the first 2 months. So my husband and I would take shifts. We would take till 2 a.m. and then I would get up at 2. And then I'm also pumping. Right. So when it's my turn to sleep, I'm still setting an alarm to pump. So you've not slept, really?
No, not a lot.
No.
Not a lot. And I know I talk to so many moms who my heart just breaks for them, who are dealing with, postpartum insomnia. And I didn't have the insomnia problem. If I had the opportunity to sleep, I could. Mm-hmm. It was just getting that good chunk of time where I could actually get some restful sleep was a struggle. And I don't know how we made it through those first couple months.
Are you a new, expectant, or aspiring mom? The Pure Nurture podcast is for moms just like you looking for information and inspiration to create a healthy new life for yourself and your growing baby. I'm Christy Rodriguez, and I'm the host of the Pure Nurture podcast. On the show, I share interviews with experts, educators, and moms who focus on a natural, holistic, mind-body approach to pregnancy, birth, and postpartum health. Join us today at purenurture.com/podcast.
Yeah. So what kind of help or support did you have in those couple of months, whether it be from family or friends or therapy or anything like that? Great
question. So my mother-in-law was here. So she was doing a ton to help us, whether it be with Leo or with our other kids. She was amazing. My family lives a couple hours away, so they would come when they could, but my mother-in-law was the only family that we had here. Mm-hmm. And I was not at the time in therapy. There was no time for me to think about myself. Mm-hmm. That's how I felt. So I feel like what happened with me is as soon as Leo started to get better was when I just crumbled. Mm-hmm. I think that it was almost like my brain said, okay, we don't need to worry so intensely about him anymore. And now you have to deal with everything that happened. Mm-hmm.
Right. So you're just going this whole time, the first several months of his life. Just
Correct.
Right.
So my intrusive thoughts and what I now know to be postpartum OCD came on very quickly. It was Wednesday before Memorial Day, and I had my kids out for a walk, and I just remember getting close to home and having this intense anxiety about going home, and I didn't want to go, and I didn't want to be alone with them. And I had these fears come up, like, what if I go crazy and hurt them in some way? What if I stabbed them? What if I drowned them? Like the most horrible, horrible thoughts you could imagine. So I started to have those thoughts, and I just remember I didn't want to come home. I ended up having a panic attack, and I called my mom, and she talked me through it. So that was the beginning.
How far postpartum are you at that point?
So that was when Leo was 7 months old. So I knew that I wanted to talk to somebody. I knew that I wanted to start medication. I had taken Lexapro for my anxiety when I was younger. I was not on anything through either of my pregnancies and was stable. But I knew I had to do something. Like, this was much bigger than me. So I called. I tried to make an appointment with some therapists, and I couldn't get in for 3 weeks was the shortest wait time.
Wow.
I tried to call a few psychiatrists to see if I could get in with them, and that was a 5-week wait. And I was just really, really desperate. I called my primary care doctor, and I was able to get in with her right away. So I went and saw her, and long story short, we said, yes, let's go ahead and start medication again.
Great.
As I'm sure you're familiar, and some of the listeners may not be, any like SSRIs or, they take time to work. So fortunately, it wasn't like I just started taking the medication and then I felt better right away.
Right.
So the therapy was really a piece that I wanted to do in conjunction with medication. I thought that I had a lot that I had to process through. So it was so bad those days. I would keep my kids outside all the time because I thought that if I went crazy, hopefully one of my neighbors would hear and come save my children. I wouldn't give my sons baths if I was home alone. I wouldn't use a knife at the table with them. Nothing that could be potentially dangerous.
Because your OCD fear was that you would hurt them?
Correct. And so I didn't trust myself. Like, I felt like if I go crazy, I need to do whatever I can to put these precautions in to try and keep them safe. I remember it was so severe. My husband and I were playing outside with my oldest son while Leo was napping, and we had the baby monitor outside. And Leo woke up, and Tyler said, why don't you go in, get Leo, and bring him outside? And I didn't even feel safe coming in the house to get him from his crib.
Because you would be alone with him?
Correct. So I pushed myself to do that, and it was agonizing. Like, I came in as quickly as I could, and I got outside with him as quickly as I could. I was just so fearful, and it was really debilitating. And so I was very desperate to talk to somebody and get some sort of therapy or support group or something to help get me through that wait time until I could start individual therapy. And I just started Googling for any group I could find, or you name it. I ended up finding Postpartum Support International's website and saw where they had a warm line that moms could call. So I called that number, and that was Friday night before Memorial Day. By Saturday morning, I had 2 messages. One was from a national rep, and then one was from a local near me. And so that was Saturday morning, and she talked to me for about an hour and a half and was absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
That was the first time that anyone ever truly acknowledged the trauma that I had experienced and said that they were sorry for what I was going through.
And
so that was the first time that I really felt like there was some hope, which was amazing. So she was wonderful and connected me. Well, she said, here are some options for you, different resources in your area that you can decide what steps you want to take next. And one was a local nonprofit group called Mom's Mental Health Initiative. And I had never heard of them. And she said that they were really great, that they had a network of therapists and primary care providers, some psychiatrists who were trained in perinatal mood and anxiety disorders and who had also agreed to see moms quickly.
Great.
If that's what the situation warranted. So she put me in touch with one of the founders. Her name is Sarah. And within a half an hour of getting off the phone with Ashley, I was talking to Sarah.
Awesome.
And they actually got me in to see a therapist that same day.
So cool. Oh,
yeah.
I love PSI for this. It is magical.
No, it is seriously. So we've shared my story both on our blog, and then it's been picked up by PSI too, because it's like the perfect example of how this chain is supposed to work. Right?
Oh, right. Yeah. Yep. That's exactly the purpose.
Yes. So it's amazing. And so they got me in to see a therapist that same day. And then they also were able to add me to a closed Facebook group that they had. It's called Circle of Hope. And it is just filled with other local moms who have struggled with perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. And we just give each other peer support. So it was amazing because prior to that, I felt so isolated. I felt like no one had ever experienced these horrible thoughts. To have that peer support, it was amazing.
What I hear in so many stories, and in your story in particular, is how incredibly healing and important it is for someone to just listen to you and validate your experience. Like there were so many opportunities for someone to sit and listen to you, but because of whatever reason, they didn't or couldn't. And once you felt heard and understood, I mean, wow. And then how quickly you got into an adequate and appropriate support just changes everything.
Everything, yes. So I knew that I wanted to do some sort of advocacy. I was just so grateful for everything that Mom's Mental Health Initiative did for me. And I knew that I could do something with this. And I didn't know exactly. I remember saying in therapy one day, I'm going to do something with this experience. I just don't know what that looks like yet. And I'd say I'm still figuring that out a little bit. Things have really fallen into place in a beautiful way. So I started just with doing a lot of peer support and Circle of Hope. And then it was actually through some of the moms in this group that I found the courage to continue with my treatment. I felt like therapy and my medication, like it wasn't enough. And so I talked to several moms who had participated in an intensive outpatient program, and they really took the fear out of that for me. And so that is what I decided to do. And I looked at it as, you know, what is the fastest way for me to get better? And the best way to do that in my mind was to just immerse myself in treatment. And so I did an outpatient program. So it was 4 days a week for 3 hours a day. And then it was completely life-changing.
That's great.
I think that one of the tough things with OCD is that it is a very tricky disease and that it requires a very specific therapy for treatment. So my outpatient program was completely focused on exposure response prevention.
Okay. So was it an OCD IOP?
It was, yes.
For the general population or for perinatal moms?
For the general population. I would have loved to do it for perinatal moms.
Right.
Yes, that was not an option in my area, unfortunately. But ironically, there was another mom in the group who shared my same experience, had a traumatic birth, and was diagnosed with PPOCD, except for she had been dealing with it for longer than I had. So when I did the program, so like I said, I think exposure response prevention, it's extremely important to mention that because,
Thank you. Yeah.
you know, with traditional talk therapy, a lot of times you will receive a lot of reassurance, you know, and that is actually not what the person who has OCD needs, because that actually fuels it. So when I would go to therapy and I was not receiving ERP, I would leave my sessions and I would feel amazing because I was getting all this reassurance and you're going to be okay. And, you know, you would never hurt your kids and all these things. But then as soon as I would leave, I would need more and more of that reassurance. So, I mean, I would spend hours and hours Googling my symptoms to, you know, make sure that I didn't fit the criteria for postpartum psychosis or, you know, just needing that constant confirmation.
Right. And exposure and response prevention is a very particular type of therapy. And the people who are providing that type of therapy need a specific training to be able to do the protocols correctly. And I just want to interject that here because I think that if you're listening and you're a mom who has OCD or who's dealing with OCD, you're looking for treatment, it is best to go to someone who has had this training and who understands how to use the protocols correctly. Because if you're not going to somebody who's trained to do it correctly, it might not help and it might hurt.
Absolutely. It's so important. And through my experience, I have thought so many times how fortunate I am to live in an area where I do have providers who have been trained in OCD and I was able to get the right help.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
It was absolutely critical for me to get better. As I was going through the IOP, I was still active in Circle of Hope and was still connected with Sarah. And they reached out to me and asked me if I would be willing to share my story at one of their fundraising events. And I said, absolutely. I was so honored that they asked me to do that. And it actually ended up being that the event I spoke at was in the evening of my last day of IOP. So it was a great capstone to that experience. And I got so much joy from, you know, speaking and sharing my story. And I felt very empowered, like I was taking power back.
Great. That's so nice.
Yeah. So that was kind of the beginning of, you know, trying to do more advocacy work. Then I just kept doing more and more. So now I have come on as the marketing and communications coordinator for Mom's Mental Health Initiative. So I do social media, their blog. So I'll do a lot of posts myself and then also coordinate any moms who want to share their story and write a guest post or, you know, we always think that that's incredible.
Right. That's awesome.
Yes. And then the quarterly newsletter. So just some basic things that I can help with to try and spread awareness. And for me personally, it has been so incredibly therapeutic to do that work. And I sometimes will joke because I'll write a post. Like when I wrote the post about my story, I wrote a pretty emotional post that I'll be posting next Monday, just around the anniversary of Leo's birth and the emotions that I have around that. And I'll often say that I feel like it's selfish for me to post that because my motivation is, I want to write this because it's healing for me to get that out in that way. And it's really been so beautiful. And I'm so grateful that they've given me the opportunity to do that. It's been amazing. So,
thank you for that. And it can feel sort of, I guess to use your word, selfish if you're doing it as part of your healing. But what we don't take into consideration is how many people it's reaching and how it's affecting them in terms of, being heard and seen and reflected out in the world. And it could be part of their healing, either like, oh gosh, that happened to me, I can get healing too, or geez, I went through this and it's so nice to know that I'm not alone. I just really, really do believe in that. And that's why I appreciate you sharing your story today, is that I don't know who's going to hear this episode, and neither do you. I do know thousands of people will hear it, but what your story is that is going to be supporting and helping other people. And this is how we are all connected. This is how we know we're connected, is through story and through experience like this. Otherwise, if no one shared, we would have no way to know that we're not alone in this.
Right. And I think a big motivator for me as well is that I think that there's such a lack of education and information for moms on the different types of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, what those symptoms look like. And
absolutely.
People had talked to me about postpartum depression. I was screened at my 6-week postpartum visit with my OB with a depression screen, and I didn't flag anything because I wasn't depressed.
Right.
My symptoms were different. And I often say to people, you're in the hospital for 3 days. It's really an injustice that no one comes to talk to the mom about, her mental health, how she's doing, what types of things she might encounter.
It is.
I remember going home from the hospital, and I delivered at 2 different hospitals. And each time I went home with this gigantic folder full of resources, of information, not one piece of paper was in there about who I might be able to contact if I needed help. Like, why wasn't there information about Postpartum Support International? Or for me, living in the Milwaukee area, like, why wasn't there a flyer for Mom's Mental Health Initiative? I mean, these resources are available and they can help so many moms, but we just need to do more to, again, I agree, share our stories, but also just let moms know that help is there.
Right. It's not that hard to do.
No.
Surprisingly easy to do.
And so I've just kind of been talking to anybody and everybody who will listen. And that includes, pediatricians. Pediatricians see moms more than anyone in those first few weeks. And, so my son's pediatrician has been fantastic, thankfully, in, wanting to check in with moms and telling them about MMHI should they need it. And I wish that someone would have done that for me.
Right.
I think especially with intrusive thoughts, they can be incredibly isolating because there's a fear of what's going to happen if I tell somebody I'm having these thoughts.
Right.
And if someone would have told me that that was a possibility, I think I would have asked for help a lot sooner.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I thank you for sharing that. This is so, so important for other people to hear. And again, just to be reflected out there. Would you like to share any additional hopeful messages for moms and families?
Yeah. So, I think there are a few things that, if you're talking about postpartum mood and anxiety disorders, there are things like you aren't alone. You will get through this. Help is available. And I think that those are all true and important messages. But another thing that I wish that someone would have said to me is that when you are through this, you might grieve the pregnancy or the postpartum period that you thought you would have. And that is okay.
Right.
The feelings that you have are completely valid and they're warranted. Like, so when I started to feel, got further in my recovery, I really started to resent the fact that I didn't have those special moments with Leo. I didn't get to do skin to skin. I didn't get to nurse him. I didn't, everything that I envisioned happening for us didn't happen. And he's my last child. So there's a grieving process for that. And I think that is so critical to recovery, is acknowledgement of that, and then doing whatever you need to do, likely, therapy or whatever other tools, but it's very important that you acknowledge those feelings and accept them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so important. I really appreciate you bringing that perspective in. Right, because people, once you're sort of better, people also want you to be kind of done and better, but there are layers to this. And even when you do get through significant amounts of healing, stuff might still pop up on, anniversaries or dates or things like that, that do warrant and need additional attention, gentle, loving attention.
That is the perfect second point that I wanted to make, and that was be aware of your vulnerabilities. Mm-hmm. So be gentle with yourself and recognize everything that you have experienced and overcome, and just know that it's important to have that radical acceptance and understand that I might always be sensitive to certain things. So if feelings do arise, it's okay. I can sit with them and let them pass when they're ready, and I think the worst thing we can do in recovery is put up our blinders and pretend like we're completely cured and we're never going to deal with any of these things again. And that's just unfortunately not reality.
Right.
So just being aware of those things. And lastly, I think this was probably the hardest thing for me to learn through this entire journey, and that was self-compassion. I think as moms, or even as women, we hold ourselves to these incredibly high standards, and we don't give ourselves credit or love or kindness. And for me, taking a step back and saying, you did experience trauma. You overcame a lot, and you should be proud of what you got through and what you're doing with it. And I think that, our brains are trained to give us all this negative self-talk, and it's just so detrimental. And as soon as you can start to be gentle with yourself and show yourself some of that self-compassion, recovery will become easier because you'll believe that you deserve it.
That's right. That's beautiful. So, thank you for that.
Yeah.
I really hope everyone out there can hear that and take that to heart and find a way to incorporate that into their own healing journey, wherever they are there. Yeah, I thank you so much, Alexis, for coming on and sharing your story and sharing your advocacy and your passion for helping other moms.
Yeah, oh my gosh, it's so incredible to be here. I can't thank you enough for the opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much. Those are some really great, hopeful messages from Alexis, and help wrap up her story of sharing today, and really great reminders for all of us and all of you out there who are currently struggling. If you'd like to learn more about the organizations that Alexis talked about, Postpartum Support International is at postpartum.net. And you can also check out Mom's Mental Health, mke.org for Mom's Mental Health Initiative. You can also find them on Facebook or email them at mmhimke@gmail.com. And as usual, please join us by subscribing to Mom and Mind wherever you listen to podcasts, or find us at momandmind.com. Thank you so much for being with us. Until next time. Thank you so much for joining us today. Please share this podcast. Together we can support moms and families so that no one has to deal with this alone. Come connect with us at momandmind.com.